First of all, thank you for inviting me. I think these Zoom programs are just wonderful. They help me feel less isolated because I get to talk to people about growing, and we learn from each other. That's the big thing. There's always learning. I've been growing. I've been a member of the Gesneriid Society before the African Violet Society, and so that was back in the 80s. And I still learn. I still learn. So anyway, I've made just a quite brief PowerPoint. And then I have a table here with stuff to show you. This first picture, I'm very excited. I have been trying to hybridize for small Streptocarpus for about 10 years now.
Wow, that's pretty.
And this is Dale's baby bluebirds. And there are only like 7 leaves on that plant. Wow. And it just goes nuts. The background includes 3 species. Lilliputana is one of them, and Cyanandrus is another one. And then one that I don't think I've ever seen in person is Arabescens. And that came from Lyndon Lyon in 1978, produced what he called Cape Beauty. And so he had this tiny plant, and then Nellie Levine entered Cape Beauty at an AVSA convention. I think she got best Gesneriid, other Gesneriid with it. And she lived in Colorado. She has since passed, but I asked her if I could have seeds, and she sent me seeds because the plant blooms, self-pollinates, and then dies.
Oh, you get that. Oh.
Yeah, it dies. And so what I did was I ended up putting pollen from others onto Cape Beauty, and Dale's baby bluebirds is one of them. And I've got its sisters are on the table here, so I'll show you those next. Okay, next photo, please. Okay. Now, this is my main plant stand. It's a homemade wooden stand that I bought for $50 about 30 years ago. And beautiful. It comes apart. So the several times we've moved, we've been able to move it. So it's got the 48-inch long fixtures. Now, initially, way back, I used T12 tubes. And the nice thing is these are on chains, so I can lower those chains and or raise them depending on what I put on those shelves. And this is just the cheapest shop light. I've got the box here, I'll show later. So I've got the box. It happens to come from Menards. I don't know if y'all have a Menards, but Costco has shop light fixtures also. This happens to be 3,300 lumens, 4,200 K, and it's bright white. Sometimes they call them daylight white. But anyway, it's cheap. I have never used any grow light type things. And in fact, when I grew under the T12s, we would look for sales whenever they had the tubes for $1, we would get those. And so I'm not saying don't go out and buy the special lights. In fact, Dr. Minbui has a phenomenal hour-long, it's at least an hour-long program. He did for AVSA for the virtual convention, and he really goes into detail about lights and the types of lights that you can use. And I'm just saying that there are options if you don't want to spend a lot of money. Now, here's the challenge with LED shop lights. Well, with LED lights at all. And that is there's no heat. Now, when I first started growing plants in the winter, I counted on that heat. I counted on the heat from T12s, then I graduated to T8s. Now, I grow in a basement, so that means my basement can get cold in the winter, and I no longer have the fluorescent lights which give off the heat. So that is a negative. If you're growing in a cool environment, you may want to stick with the fluorescent T12s or T8s. Okay, next. Now, what I do is, you can see on the upper left, I have a young plant in a solo cup. Now, the big deal for me is I always leach the cup with 1 or 2 cups of room temperature water to leach out fertilizer salts. And then, because I consider the soil nice and clean, then I'm able to transfer that pot into a slightly larger pot, in this case a 3-inch pot, by making the mold. You can see in the upper right, I took a solo cup. And so this way, I do not disturb a single root. I do not want to disturb it. And on streps, you do not want to bury a strep deeper than what it is. And so what I do is I just slide that leached pot into its new pot. You can see on the lower left, I did that. Now, the big deal for me, as you can see on the bottom right, is my mound of soil is slightly higher than the rim of the pot. And this is a way that I keep myself from burying the plant too deep. Okay, next. Now, I use soaking wet acrylic yarn or pantyhose, which I cut into strips, and it's soaking wet, and my perlite is soaking wet. And what I do is I put about 1/2 inch of perlite in the bottom of my pots. And then I've got my soaking wet wick there. Now, my soil, because I wick water, is 50 to 60% perlite. And I happen to use the Pro Mix HP with fungicide, the mycorrhiza. Now, I'm not saying you have to do that. You need to find whatever soil works for you and then figure out how much perlite it takes so that your strep isn't stressed by having a heavy soil or being wet, too wet. So when I moved from California to Texas, what happened was my plants went into stress. Well, I had brought with me the fertilizer, the soil mix, and the only thing different in Texas was the water. Well, duh. I ended up asking the local African Violet group, what soil do you use? Because the only thing different was the soil. And sure enough, they told me it looked like all of them used the Volkman Brothers soil. Now, Volkman Brothers is in Dallas. And so I bought the Volkman Brothers and I added my perlite, and by golly, my plants were just fine. So anyway, whatever soil works for you, then figure out the percentage of perlite that's needed. Okay, next. Now, when you get leaves, cut the leaves into about 2.5-inch sections, and I cut underwater. Now, what happened was I lived in California. I was watching the Rose Parade. They did a behind the scenes about the roses. And they, one of the float people was asked, how do you keep those roses so fresh? And he said, I cut the stems underwater because I want them to soak up water, not suck up air. Wow. And it went like a light bulb in my head. And the minute I started doing this, cutting sections underwater, I had significant success. And keep in mind that I'm the one who started hybridizing for variegation, like the istartistry. And variegated leaves tend to not do as well for propagation, but once I started cutting underwater, they did so much better. I stopped cutting out the midribs, especially with the variegated leaves. I found that success wasn't as good as when I cut them into sections like this. And then I bury the sections about 1/2 inch or 3/4 of an inch deep. Be sure to plant the correct side down. If you plant, I have discovered if you goof and plant it upside down, so to speak, for whatever reason, you don't get the babies, or you don't get as many babies. So anyway, make sure, like I'm real careful. I leave the leaf in that water for about 5 minutes. And then I very carefully plant them right away so I know which end is down. Mm-hmm. Okay, next. All right, now I tend to put things in high humidity. And this happens to be the baby bluebirds that you saw in that very first slide. So I chopped up baby bluebirds and put it in a container. And I do have some perlite I see in the very bottom. So this is moist, not muddy. And how long it takes to make the little plants really depends on the temperature of your room and the season. If you have a window in your plant room and those plants know that the days are getting longer, then I find that they'll make their new plantlets faster than if it's December or November, December, when your room might be cooler and the days are shorter. So anyway, this time of year is kind of marginal. You may find that you don't get your young plants for maybe until like Valentine's Day.
Wow.
Okay, next. Now, it's very important. There's an arrow at the bottom of that pot. And again, see, it's slightly above the rim of the pot. Many, not all, many Streptocarpus have a color change at their bases. Even when you pull off a baby from a mother leaf, often you'll see reddish color. Now, you do not want to bury that reddish color all the way. I usually try to leave at least 1/4 of an inch of that reddish color above the soil. Now, this happens to be, the white thing happens to be a label that I'm supporting this leaf. But I'll show you later what else I use to support leaves. Okay, next. Now, here's a more mature plant. There's the arrow pointing to a reddish color. And you can see how I wrap that wick around the base. And then I'm very careful not to totally bury that reddish color. I try to stay 1/4 of an inch under, even if I have to pull up that plant in order to pack around it and make sure that I don't bury the red. Okay, next. Now, one of the easiest things to me to do to increase humidity when I transplant is I use straws. And I'll put plastic straws in there, and then I'll just gently lay some saran wrap on top of it. And I leave that on there maybe a week, maybe a week and a half or so, until I'm pretty sure that plant's not going to go into shock. On the bottom, you can see that that's that same plant I had earlier. And even though I did not disturb the soil on that, I still want to make sure it doesn't go into shock. And so I just slipped a sandwich baggie over it. Next. Okay, here's some leaf propagation. And I let my little plants get a pretty good size. And then you can see number 2 there in the upper right. I pulled back the mother leaf and I wick water. So you can see my purple wick there. But the arrows are pointing to red. And then number 3 shows how I separated a bunch of babies. And then number 4 there on the bottom right shows I usually put 2 young plants in a container. I happen to like to use a square pot because when they're young like this, I can put about 25 square pots in a tray. And then I can just water that whole tray. Now, the reason I'm able to do that, to water a whole tray, is because I'm really sure I don't have any bugs. Now, if I had a whole bunch of different plants, I would not group tray, but I happen to know that these are all young plants and they don't have bugs, and so I'm able to do a community tray. Okay, next. Now, you should trim your leaves with craft scissors. In the olden days, we called them pinking shears. And you should do it to the natural shape of the leaf. Now, what I've done here is the upper left shows leaves that I happened to trim off, and because they were getting in each other's way. And then I decided, well, in a couple of months, I'm going to show this plant, so I better start trimming that. So in the upper right, I took a normal leaf and I put it on top of one of those leaves that I need to trim. And I'm using that as a guide. And then the bottom left shows that I cut the right side of it with a craft scissors. And then I need to do the left side. Now the bottom right shows you that I've trimmed. And with the pinking shears, that's an awfully sharp triangle. And so I sometimes just take my finger and thumbnails and I kind of round them. Now, then I'll take an African violet leaf and I'll split it and I'll squeeze it so that the juice comes out of that stem. And I rub that against the cut wound that I just made with the pinking shears. Now, if you were about to enter a plant in a show, I would do this the day before or the day of, if you've got time to do it that morning. And then that way, for sure, you won't have any. This helps prevent brown edges is what it does. Okay, next. Now, the Gesneri Society has webinars. The upper left is the free. There's actually 2 free webinars. And so you can request that. And I happen to be the one that gives you the secret code. And so when you order this, then it comes to me. And you can see Paul Suzy, who's part of the audience today. He is on the webinar team. And so we ended up making this webinar. So it goes through the Gesneriid family and talks about the different plants. Now, in the upper right, this is an hour-long growing and hybridizing Streptocarpus. And essentially what it is you just saw a little PowerPoint, just a tiny PowerPoint. But the one that I made has lots and lots and lots of pictures, and you'll hear me talk about each picture. And it's downloaded into your computer. You can watch it over and over again. And they're $14.95 to the Gesneriid Society. Those of us on the webinar team that make these webinars do not get a penny. It all goes to the Gesneriid Society. The bottom left, Brendan Erickson, and I did a webinar, Tips on Growing Show Plants. He's a lot of fun. And then on the lower right, this, I am so proud of this. This is a masterclass on hybridizing. And we've got 4 webinars rolled into one big webinar. And this one's 1995. And it's got Dr. Jeff Smith talking about genetics. It's got Pat Hancock with Mel Grace talking about hybridizing African violets. And then Jeremy Stevens. Those of you on Facebook know that he hybridizes miniature syringes. He and I did a webinar on syringes. And Karen Allen and I did a webinar on hybridizing Streptocarpus. Next. Okay, so sometime invite me back in the future and we can chat about micro, miniature, and miniature syringes. Okay, let's turn that off and I'll share with you what I've brought on the table. Well, while you're doing that, I'll say that my reservoirs, a lot of them are very old from John Cook. And Heidi Dillenbeck, who took over the John Cook supplies and everything, she sells the reservoirs. You can always use like a, like I've got here just a plastic container. This had potato salad in it. And you could cut holes in the lid. And what I do is I have hefty baggies. So I use these hefty baggies, and the sandwich one is good for the 2-cup pints. And then I use the great big gallon size to line my bigger reservoirs. And you don't have to have round to use the baggie. You can put it on your potato salad container. And now I like algae. I do like algae. I use the old algae water, and I take cuttings from my Gesneriids and my African violets, and I root them in the old algae water. And they root quite nicely. Okay.
Dale?
Yes.
Can I ask a question? When you do your wicking, you say you use acrylic yarn.
Yes.
What ply do you use?
4.
And you use the whole 4 ply?
I'm glad you asked. I used all 4 if it's a 3-inch pot or larger. The solo cups only get 2.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm glad you asked that. Yeah, they only get 2.
Yep. We can see.
You can see, okay.
Yeah.
Can you see that there's holes? This is one of those foam things. And okay, those of you who grow African violets know that if you take your flower peduncle, so this is a foam thing, and those of you that grow African violets know that you can take your flower stem here and you take off the flowers and the buds, and then you plant this, and then you end up getting a plant. You hope to get a plant, especially a chimera. Well, I'm a big fan of algae water, and Paula Bell, if that's how you say her last name, she said, what about rooting them in algae water? So that's why I made this. Wow. And then that way this pokes in there. Let's see, I don't know if there. That way it pokes in there. And she and I discovered the thicker this is, the better. And she actually takes a pin and pokes a little bit there to stimulate that area into making roots. Okay, this is my reservoir. Okay, now I've got a towel under here because I'm gonna lift this up and make a mess. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Wow.
See the roots?
Wow.
And then there's the babies. That's now the reason I did this is because this is my hybrid, and it's an edge puff fantasy. And I could not get it to come true from leaves. And you know, you're supposed to do 3 generations. So anyway, I decided to give this a try. Now, this I did 5 months ago. And so I think these are pretty doggone big. And I left them in here because I wanted to just demonstrate. So they really need to be potted up. But anyway, I just love algae water, and I don't do anything to prevent it.
Dale?
Yeah.
How do you put that into a container?
This is my reservoir. So that's got water and it's got old algae water in it.
Okay, and then the foam.
And it floats. It floats, yeah. The foam floats.
Okay.
So you could do this for African violets. You can do it for nereids. You can do it for all sorts of things. And you just have to make the hole not too big. Like I've got some holes here that are too big and some that are too little. So anyway, just showing that you need to kind of watch the size of the hole. Okay, now I recently moved, and so therefore I removed all the flowers from my Streptocarpus plants because it was a 2-month event, and when you allow a plant to have flowers, they drink. And so they drink too much. I could not pay attention to them for 8 weeks. And so I removed all the flowers. So I'm sorry that I don't have many flowers to show, but this is a sister to baby bluebirds that's just starting to bloom. And one of these stems has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 flowers on it. Wow. This is Flock of Sparrows, Dale's flock.
I just got that.
Did you? Excellent.
Yes.
Excellent.
I was very fortunate to win a gift certificate from the virtual convention last year. And I got it from this year, and I got it from Patty's patch.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah.
So this is a sister to baby bluebirds. And then, see, this one's even a tinier flower. Okay, and then, and see, these are newly propagated. This one's Dale's cute as a button.
Oh,
so it's a real little.
Oh, pretty.
So these are my little ones. And then, remember, I showed you baby bluebirds in my program and how I put down leaf sections. This is a leaf section with its little plants on it. And so this is about 4 months into it. And I've got a little flower starting there, and I left it there, but I'm going to remove it because plants grow faster if you don't let them bloom. And so I'm going to take that off. And then I've got to separate these guys, and each will get its own little solo cup.
Marie, I got you.
Okay. Now, another thing I was going to show you is I don't use a high bloom fertilizer. I use a variety of orchid fertilizers. This one's from Lowe's, and it's 2014-13, and there's no urea. I've got this thing about urea. Now, you saw my plant stand. That's only 1/8 of a teaspoon per gallon. That's all I use is 1/8 of a teaspoon per gallon. And here's another one. This is a 20-10-20, so it's not high bloom either. This is another orchid one. I happen to like the Dynagrow Foliage Pro. It's a 936. So all those middle numbers, the phosphate is not high bloom. I don't use high bloom. And I always use 1/8 of a teaspoon. But again, you need to figure out what fertilizer does the best with whatever soil you've chosen. And that makes a big difference. Okay, support for plants. Solo cup, and I cut out a little section here because it's round at the top, and so it's gentle on the leaves. And so I use these to support plants because I don't plant them deep. You know, I have them a little bit above the rim of the pots. So I use these, and I can also put the name of the plant on this too. Smart. But I might use a whole bunch of those. And those of you that grow Primulina and Petrocosmia, you recognize this as an African violet support. And these are nice to use to support your Primulinas and Petrocosmias. And especially when you take them to a show, because this protects them from getting smacked. Now, let's see. I'm kind of excited because this variegated plant is a species. This is Streptocarpus Candida, and it's known for having flowers with a very, very, very mild scent of like honey. And it's got gorgeous variegation on it. And I crossed it with Dale's Polar Canary,
wow,
which is variegated. And I got my first flower. I have to say I'm disappointed. It's purple. And I'm not real fond of purple. Now, it's got an elongated flower there. Very nice variegation on it. And I'll sniff it in the morning to see if there's scent. And it's up close in person. The flower's kind of neat, and there's 3 flowers on the very first stem. So this is going to be a really, really, really good bloomer. So we'll see. I've got siblings to it. And this is the perfect size to go into a 3-inch pot. But first I'll leach with room temperature water all the fertilizer salts that have been built up. And then I'll put it in a larger pot. You can see I've got it in a fairly small pot right now, and that's its wick. It's only got the 2 ply because this is a little pot. And just kind of showing, this is my new miniature Sininja, Dale's Christmas bells.
Oh, that's pretty.
Yeah, I really like that one. Okay, that's, oh, I was going to show you. This is the fixture. See if I can, there. That's the fixture. And it's just a shop light, just a normal shop light. I think it was like $18.
Yeah, that's a whole integrated unit. So the bulb is in. No, I mean the diodes are in there. That's one unit. Yeah,
it's one thing. Yeah, and I use 2 per shelf only because my shelves are very wide. That's a wide shelf. But yeah, it's and this is supposedly guaranteed. I think it says for 5 years. And gosh, I've had these lights Well, the Gesneriid convention that we last had, I did rather well with my streps, and those were grown under these LED lights. So at 12 hours a day. So, okay, question time.
Very good.
I have a question on your reservoirs. You've got individual containers. Now I know Mel Grice uses a communal tray for his wicking. Do you see negatives and positives to either way, or just?
The reason I don't want to use a communal watering system is bugs. If you get soil mealy, that's it. It spreads. It just spreads. And I've been wiped out in California. I was wiped out by mites, and in Texas, Texas is real bad for thrips and the soil mealy. So I've been wiped out, and I just don't want to go through that again. So but I will put two streps on one single quart reservoir, like a Cool Whip tub kind of thing. I'll put 2 on there. And the one thing I'm going to suggest if you do that is to cut a 3rd hole, because if you've got 2 holes occupied, when you go to add more water, then it sort of floods. You got to lift one up in order to pour the water. So that's the only reason I don't do communal watering, except for my babies. When I know they're seedlings and they don't have bugs, then it's communal.
Thank you.
Dale, how much, well, you drench with lime, right? Every now and then, like once a month?
Lime? Epsom salts, you mean?
Oh, Epsom salt, I'm sorry. That's what I meant.
Yeah.
How much do you use?
Okay. When I do the Epsom salts is when I'm going to clean out the reservoir, dump the water at about 9 weeks. Every 9 weeks, then I dump that algae water, I throw away the baggie, and I wash the lid. The lid's the only thing I wash. And then when I'm leaching that pot of fertilizer salts, I'll put my cup or 2 of water through it, and then I'll put the Epsom salts. So I'll do like half a teaspoon per quart, something like that, and pour it through the pot. Or I actually prefer to use this. I prefer to, after I leach, to put back fertilizer. The only reason to use the Epsom salts maybe is if I notice that the plant tends to have yellowish leaves. So anyway, I do that every 9 weeks, because the reservoirs, I'm adding water, and that reservoir then gets a concentration of fertilizer because of evaporation and everything. So I'm real careful about that. If I can help it, I never, ever, ever allow a strep to wilt a little. Some people let their streps wilt a little, and then they add more water. Well, when a plant is allowed to wilt, let's say 3 or 4 times, then you're going to start seeing a couple things. You're going to see that the leaf color is duller, maybe yellower, and the edges of the leaves are going to start getting a little brown. In addition, if a plant is trying to make some flower stems, and then you've let it wilt, well, sometimes that damages the buds. And then when they open, they might be a little bit deformed. So I just don't allow my streps to get dry. Once in a while, I'll have reservoir that doesn't work quite right, and that'll be my fault. And then I'll have to leach it just to get it wet again. Because when a plant gets too dry and the dryness causes the soil to pull away from the edge of the pot, you can kind of see 1/8 of an inch all the way around. That root ball never really sucks up the water again. You really have to redo that plant. So I'm real careful about dryness for the streps. I just don't want them to be dry.
Then another question is, how about temperature for streps? Remember, we talked in the summer because my problem is temperature.
Yeah, they really prefer to be cool. They really want to be cool. And so if they're consistently, that was my problem in California when I had the T12s, because California is pretty warm, and I had the T12s and the temperature was like 85, 88, sometimes 90. They start wilting, the leaves start wilting. Well, the last thing you want to do is water a plant that's wilting because it's hot. You just don't want to do that, because then it ends up getting root rot. So the temperature is critical. Now, somebody in Florida told me what they do is they were growing their plants in the heat. What they would do is they would take a clay pot and they would put sphagnum moss between the clay pot and their plastic pot. And then they would water the sphagnum. And then that way it cooled off the bottom of the pot.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I thought that was a good idea.
Yeah. When you start your leaves, what are you starting them in? Like most of us violet people do a 50-50 perlite and vermiculite, but I noticed the mix you're using for starting leaves is different than what I use. What do you use? Just the soil mix?
Yes, I prefer to use the soil mix that's about 50 to 60% perlite. A million years ago, when I first started growing gesneriads, Dolly Crowder was her name. And in my grow and study group, she very strongly felt that the leaves would start making roots if they were a little bit thirsty. They would then put out roots and search for the moisture. And so by having a lighter mix rather than a heavy mix that's sort of muddy, I think that helps the plant then make roots faster.
Okay. Then my last question is, when you use the soil that has microhaze in it,
yes,
do you ever add additional microhaze?
I did purchase some. I don't, but Mel Grice recommends the dry molasses. Yeah. And what I ended up doing was we have a health food store. And so I went to the health food store and I got some raw sugar. And so I just put a little raw sugar. Sure makes the soil mix smell good. And so that's what I do. And this also reminds me, I lived in Texas, and those of you who have grown the Apache and the Rodeo African violets, that was J.C. Monk. So Mr. Monk, we had club at his house, his wife's house. And he never disbudded, by the way. And he had these monster plants. Well, anyway, he grew in an air-conditioned garage. And what he showed us how he transplants. And what he used to do was he'd make a hole in the new pot and he would sprinkle a pinch of sugar and a pinch of oatmeal, not the instant oatmeal. He said it had to be the kind that you cook. And so he would sprinkle that in the hole. He swore by it. He said it really helped his plants have an extra boost of being able to grow quicker. And I said to him, JC, we live in Texas. We have cockroaches. Don't you get cockroaches in your plants? And he says, no, he never did. So I thought that was interesting. And so that's why I kind of like the raw sugar idea. If you've got the molasses that Mel Grice recommends, I'm sure that's perfectly fine too.
Because from what I understand, if you use microhaze, then the molasses feeds the microhaze, right?
Yes, that's the theory that they need that. Yeah.
Do you grow your violets the same way with the same?
Yes, I grow the violets are exactly the same. I never give high bloom to my African violets. I have gotten best in show with an African violet. And like Jolly Marvel, I entered that at the Gesneriad convention. I think it was 2014. And I got the blue ribbon for that. So anyway, my theory is as long as your leaves and your roots are happy, then your plant will make as many flowers as genetically possible.
When you say you repot, I'm sorry everyone, but I just got a million questions.
No.
When you say you repot and you put a hole in the middle and you put the other plant in that, the plant in the hole of the new pot. Right. What if you're repotting because so many leaves have gone bad and you want to make it smaller? Is it okay to cut back the roots then?
Yes, and I'm glad you asked that. In that case, I whack off the bottom, I'd say about 2 inches. Okay. I cut off the bottom 2 inches. But first I leach it. Then I cut off the bottom, and then I cut off all those nasty leaves. And if it's real bad, I might cut some sides off. But if you do all that, then you'd really better put your straws in there and put the saran wrap over it, because streps will go into shock.
Okay. Very interesting.
Can I ask, when you had the mealybug infection?
Yeah.
What did the leaves look like? Because I had something go through my streps last spring and I had to throw them all out.
Well, mostly mealybug makes yellow. And so the leaves end up being yellow. And when I purchase a plant and I see after a while, it's getting yellow, which I'm going to say happened to me recently. I pulled out the plant. Sure enough, it was loaded. So now
Did you say you had mites or mealybugs?
Well, I've had both.
What about the mites?
The mites on a strep start at the tip, not in the middle like an apple.
Okay, and then the whole thing gets weird on the way down.
Yes, all the way down. Is that what happened?
Yes.
Yes. Mites go on the end. On a primulina, they'll be in the middle, just like an African violet. But streps, they start at the tip, and the next thing you know, it's
all the way down.
Now, I do use systemic. I'm going to try to get that to be a close-up here. And I'm not sure.
I lost it. I lost you.
Imidacloprid. It's a granules like sand. And I put, I don't know, about 1/8 of a teaspoon in a pot. What I'll do is I'll poke a hole in the soil, and then I'll pour some of this. We used to be able to get Marathon, like from Cape Cod, little guys, containers. But this is a bonide product, and it's systemic houseplant insect control, protects plants from damage by aphids, whiteflies, and other listed insects. So I tend to use this on a new plant when I get a new plant.
Do you just sprinkle it on the top or you sprinkle it on the roots?
No, I'm glad you asked that, because this only works if the plant has roots. So let's say you get a leaf and you chop the leaf up and plant that leaf, forget it, it doesn't have the roots. And so on this container, it actually says mealybugs, and thrips and whitefly. Oh, I've had whitefly when I lived in California. So anyway, this is a granular thing, and you can find, as long as it's got the I word, imidacloprid, IMIDACLOPRID,
whatever. Yeah, that's.
I wrote it down.
Yeah,
You don't mix it with water. You just sprinkle it in the soil.
Well, I poke a hole. I might poke like 3 holes, and then I put a little bit in each hole, kind of cover that, and then get it wet. Get it wet because it will absorb through the roots and kill the insects. And sometimes, like, I got a plant I really, really want. I really, really wanted it. And by golly, I'm fighting the mealies right now. I'm fighting the mealies because I want that plant. And I'm isolating it. It's in its own container. And I don't touch anything else unless I wash my hands real good. But I want that plant, and I'm determined to keep that plant.
Understand.
More questions, people?
Do you just bud your strips before you go to show?
Say that again?
Do you just bud your strips before you go to show?
Absolutely.
Like we do violets?
I just bud my streps December, January, and February. Every winter, they are not allowed to have flowers. I still give them their fertilizer. They still stay under 12 hours of light, but it gives them a rest from blooming. And what happens is the energy goes into roots and leaves. And if I have a show in April or May, then I stop disbudding about 6 weeks before the show, depending on how warm my room is. The warmer the room, the faster the flowers. And if my room is pretty doggone warm, I'll have show plants in 4 weeks.
Wow.
So,
what do? You just pick them off, or you cut them off when they come up, or?
Yeah, I cut them off as soon as I can see a bud.
Okay.
And if you invite me back to talk about some ninjas,
next month.
I have a secret,
yeah, right.
secret for show plants on these. And it involves just budding.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, you're invited.
Now, what happens to the leaves after you disbud them? Be quiet, Carolyn.
Oh.
What happens to the leaves after you disbud them? Because then you take them off eventually?
Well, a strep usually only gives you about 7, 8, 9, 10 flower stalks. If I know that this plant would have produced that by the time of the show, then what I do is, let's say it's January, I will cut that big leaf and leave a 3-inch stub. And then what happens is it makes a new plant from that stub, from the base. It might even make 3 plants from that stub. The more leaves in your plant at showtime, then the more flowers you're going to have. And so if I know that that leaf is going to be done normally, make it a stub, and then right before the show, I cut the stub, and by then it's already got bigger leaves and flowers.
I'm interested in where, do you mostly do miniature strips?
That has been my well, I do variegated. I was the first in the world to cross two variegated plants. And that's where the iced amethyst show off, the iced artistry, ice pink flamingo came from. I was the first in the world to do that. Then I got a mutation from a strep lilliputana, which is tiny, tiny. I got a mutation from that, and that's what caused the polar. That's what caused yellow variegation, because the ice plants have chunks of white, chunks, but the other has like striations of yellow. And so I concentrated on variegation, and for the last 10 years or so, I've been concentrating on reducing the size by using lilliputana. Now, even if you cross two little guys, you can get a big guy, and so that's the problem. It has taken me 10 years to get this. And Smurf Party, if any of you have Dale's Smurf Party, that was, I would say, my biggest success. And it has the same father as this one. It's the very same father, but the flowers are much bigger and the plant can get a little bit bigger. So
where do we get some of your small plants?
Well, I give away at conventions, and I trust Kathy Spiesman in Atlanta, Georgia. Yeah, she does all sorts of things. Like David Harris gets David Harris, I gave him some of my little guys too. Here's the problem. I'm not naming names. A long time ago when I had the ice hybrids, I was giving them to commercials, the big ones that you all know. And the very next year at the AVSA convention, I expected to see all my ice plants because, the gal in New York, Bloomin' Jungle, she was getting like $80, $90 for one of my ice hybrids. And I expected these big commercials to be selling those at the next AVSA convention. And when they weren't, I was actually pretty grumpy because I'd given away all these big leaves. And so I asked, why aren't you selling? You know, she's getting $70, $80 a plant. Well, Dale, we're a big commercial and it's hard for us to pay attention to any one hybrid. And I said, $80, she's making $80.
Yeah, 10 plants.
So anyway, David Harris, and she was the only one. So I'm not giving them ever any of my hybrids. If they happen to have them, which they do sell my hybrids, well, they got them from somebody else, not me. Because that really, really made me angry.
Who was the other one you said? Somebody in Atlanta?
Oh, that's Kathy Spiesman. Kathy Streps.
Okay.
Kathy Streps.
Mrs. Streps.
Yeah, Mrs. Streps.
Oh, Mrs. Streps. Okay.
All right.
Yeah. And she's on Facebook too. So I trust her. She pays attention to my hybrids.
You want to come down here? Yeah.
And then David Harris. I did give David Harris some.
Where's David Harris? Where?
He's Missouri. He's the Ozark hybridizer, the miniature Sininjas. But he pays attention to my hybrids too, so he gets them. But I was hoping like AVSA's in Atlanta next year. And so I want to make sure that Kathy gets even more of my leaves before the AVSA convention so that she has some for sale then. And then Patty Daniel, she's got some. I think she's Nebraska, Kansas. Anyway, there's on Facebook, there are some people that I give to that aren't the big commercials that won't pay attention to them. Don't cross me. And be sure, when you can finally meet together, be sure to order the free Gesneriad webinar. It's about an hour long, and you can show that. And again, you keep it, it's in your computer. And in fact, any of you can order it. It's free. And I'm the one who sends those. And we've got like 20, I think it's 25 webinars on practically any Gesneriad you can think of. We've got that. And the first time I made the strep one, if you ever order that hour-long strep one, because I've got well over 100 photos in there about how to grow streps, we did those live. We premiered on a Tuesday night, and it was live. And so when you hear me on that webinar, I am just scared to death. I am so nervous, but I got through it. And the Syninga one too, I'm pretty sure was live. Thad Skaggs did Epecia, and I'm pretty sure that was also live, but they recorded these things live at one time, and then after a while not. And then we've got a couple of African violet ones. Sandra Skalski does one, and she grows these great big standards. And then we've got Dr. Smith does one on the species, and Andrea Worrell, she does the miniatures. She did a phenomenal webinar on that. So there are African violet ones that you can order.
I've always wondered why in New York, because I grew them in Alabama and they always had huge standards too. And up here, I can't get them this big as I did anywhere else. Carolyn told me it was something that I can't remember, but I'm just annoyed because I would like to grow big ones too.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and like, okay, when I lived in Texas, if I got J.C. Monk's Apache and Rodeo, they grew huge because he bred them in Texas.
Yeah, I think that makes a difference.
We couldn't get the storks. The storks hybrids wouldn't grow as big in Texas.
Right.
Well, I think genetically, you know, when you're a hybridizer in a certain area, well, your success is because it happens to grow very well, maybe because your house is cool in the winter, or it's warm in the winter, you know, like in Los Angeles, there were certain plants we couldn't grow in Los Angeles well, I'm not going to say who we struggled with strep-wise, but anyway, in California, we struggled, and that's because it was always hot. And so, and this person...
Story, you know, Buckeye's Cranberry Sparkler shows up on every great list. I have had it die on me 3 times.
Oh, no.
Me too.
I just sort of groan every time its name is mentioned and I see it on another list. I have other Buckeyes that are fine, but that one hates me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, my favorite is Frozen in Time, and I can't grow it.
Oh, I have that.
I can't grow it.
In fact, I could show it to you right now. I was going to show it for little.
Oh, my God.
gosh.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's always in bloom.
Wow.
Always in bloom.
Wow. You know, I was hybridizing African violets with green because the flowers last a long time, like Frozen in Time lasts a long time. And in fact, this plant that I've got here has green in the background, the one that I rooted in the foam. So it's got green in it. So, and I have no idea how I got a Puff Fantasy Edge. Have no idea.
That's going to be special.
Well, yeah, if it works. See, I don't know yet because these are young and I got to get them out of there because they've been in there 5 months because I didn't want to plant them. I wanted to be able to show during a Zoom. So I've got to plant them and then see, because if it doesn't come true, then I throw it away. I've sort of given up on African violet breeding because, you know, it takes 5, 6, 7, 8 months to get seeds, where a Seninja is 30 days, a strap is 60 days. So trying to breed African violets just takes too long. And the older I am, the less time I have to grow out 3 generations, you know. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm still in shock that I turned 70. So
Well, you don't look it.
thanks.
Be well and be happy.
Well, I sure appreciate your inviting me, and go ahead and invite me in the future. Mel Grice is also, he did a Primulina one for Houston. He did a Primulina show for Houston. I'm trying to think of others. You know, there are a lot of Gesneriid people that would be happy to give a program. I don't know if Joyce Stork gives programs.
Oh, we had her last year.
Oh, good. You know, did you have her? Oh,
no, we flew her.
We flew her in.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because she came to our Illinois convention. We have a convention every year that, of course, was canceled this year. But yeah, she came, and she's funny and fun, and
Yeah.
so
True. Maybe she'll do another one for us.
Yeah.
well, she might do a Zoom.
Yeah.
Yeah. We also had Paul Kroll.
There you go.
Right.
Yeah.
He was in the building.
Yeah.
I actually love him. He and Mel Grice. They're phenomenal.
Yeah.
Really, really enjoy them.
Yeah. But that's what Zoom's giving us, a chance to hear from all these people.
Yeah.
It's not
Not the
special.
same old boring meetings that we.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I'm going to leave and say goodbye to everybody and thank Dale for coming. And thank
Dale very much. It was a wonderful program.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Take care,
Thank you, Dale.
Mary Kay. Take care, Bill.
Bye.
Bye, Mary Kay.
Gotta go,
Good
Jim.
night.